Good morning. Good morning. Hello. Hello. May I invite you all to enter and take a seat? Good morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. It's a pleasure to see so many people in the room. If you're not familiar with Helms, I'm going to take just a quick moment and let you know this is a bakery that's been here since 1931. The sound just went up. And they have quite a reputation for hosting events related to art, architecture, and design. So the West Side Urban Forum, American Institute of Architects LA chapter, LA Cal Poly Metro, all host events in here. So this is a space that's welcoming to you and to your community. So I hope that you'll find yourself here again. My name is Leslie Roberts. I'm a native Angelino, and I work and play in the spaces around art, architecture, design, culture, material. And was delighted when PLP SoCal and OM invited me to moderate this morning's talk. We envisioned today, and we thought that maybe we would get about 30 people in the room and that it would be a casual chat. And, and I think that looking around at the room, I think we all realize that we've really touched a nerve. We've touched a sweet spot. And empathy is such a wonderfully encompassing concept. It's one that can define both the ways that we approach our own practice, but also influences the ways that we think about the space and the products that we design for others. You may have come here this morning either because of an appeal for a particular speaker or the opportunity to be in community in the room with people who share your interest and your passion for this subject. One of the quick things I want to say on that note, on the sense of empathy, is we had originally invited 4 speakers this morning, and one of them is not able to join us, Lynette Tedder from Perkins and Will. And unfortunately, it's because she stopped on the 5. There's a fire. And I don't know if everyone in the room is aware yet. I know I personally only saw the national news this morning. So many of our friends, acquaintances, family members, whatnot, are affected. The 5 is shut in both directions and apparently part of the 405. So on the one hand, it's a painful but timely reminder of why empathy is such a critical part of our everyday lives. But also it's a piece of information for you. So we'll have 3 fabulous, talented speakers come up and join us this morning. So what we're going to do is invite the 3 of them up in turn. They'll do a presentation, share their thoughts, and then after the 3rd, we'll invite the group up and do a moderated Q&A. And then open the floor to questions. And we also hope that you will stay behind and engage with each other and engage with the sponsors. PLP SoCal, OM, Light Glass, and Vode Lighting have all contributed to your experience this morning. And I would just sort of repeat that my personal experience in working with all of these people is that there's a genuine hunger and curiosity about this topic of empathy, and that we hope that this is just the beginning of many opportunities for us to gather and pursue this topic and others. So on that note, and with no further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Julie Smith-Clementi. She's a product designer and an architect.
So in September, my husband, Frank, and I left the firm that we'd been working with and starting with Mark Rios, Rios Clementi Hill Studios, and our product company, Not Neutral. Frank and I have worked together for over 30 years, and we are hoping to work for another 20 together. And the thing that we've come to is to understand that we want to focus more of our time and effort to more directly engage with the complex relationships between users and their spaces. And I think in this process of kind of starting anew, we wanted to kind of look back and understand sort of how we got here, what are the values that we want to carry forward. And empathy has been something that we have incorporated in our design process sort of from the very beginning. And so this talk kind of came at a perfect time for us. So empathy, how we can see through other people's eyes, how we can feel what they feel, how we can experience what they experience, is so important in a human-centered approach for design and really the starting point of any process. So I'm going to use some examples today that really focus more on the objects that mediate space and experience, and I'm going to let the others talk a little bit more about space. So let's go here. So I think that where I wanted to start was this kind of the notion of introspection and looking back at sort of one of the kind of pivotal projects that I think sort of set our design direction many years ago. In the 1990s, Warner Brothers came to us to design a child care center, and this was a user group that we had never designed for before. These children come at 6 weeks of age. They're essentially little blobs, and by the time they leave a center at, say, 5, they're walking, talking little humans. And so the change that they experience in this building over that amount of time is just enormous. So really trying to understand, and at the time, like, designing for kids wasn't really that big a thing. People didn't quite understand it, or it wasn't particularly important. And I think Warner Brothers sort of came to it with an intentionality and really wanted to make something particularly special. So we really focused a lot on what it meant to design for kids. And the thing that came across during the process was that it wasn't just the kids, right? We had to design for the operators. We had to design for the HR group. We had to design for the parents. And we had to design for the facilities people, because basically all they wanted was something that was completely indestructible. So what it comes down to is that you had to have serious empathy for each one of those groups involved. And I really like this diagram that Charles and Ray Eames did that looked at sort of the interest, they called it the interest overlap. And so I'll sort of think of it more as like an empathy overlap. That they looked at different constituent groups and their interests, and when those things overlap, that's where design happens, and they said with conviction and enthusiasm. And we've been going through a process of thinking about design and our process and trying to map it out based on a book by Nigel Cross called Design Thinking. And the 3 design values that he gives are practicality, ingenuity, and empathy. And he talks about the idea of a convergent kind of thinking, where you get rid of possibilities and try to narrow it down to a single possibility, versus a divergent thinking, whereas you're looking at many different things and opening up possibilities and testing the ideas there and exploring solutions. And so this idea of design thinking is in many different industries. This slide is actually from a UI group, interaction design, and it lays out this very nonlinear process. It used to be that design was sort of more kind of formally related, like people would come to it with more of a preconceived notion, particularly when I started. So this idea that we can have a different kind of process and think about design in a way that starts with empathy and starts with really trying to understand the user group, then define the problems, work on some ideas, prototype those ideas, test them, take them back to the user group, and start that process kind of all over again is definitely a way that we've been working. So the first example I want to talk about is this company, Intelligentsia Coffee, came to Not Neutral about 10 years ago and said that they had this kind of last mile problem, which I actually think is like a last 3 feet problem. They were sourcing the coffee from amazing farmers all over the world. They were shipping the beans to Los Angeles and to Chicago. They were roasting with the most amazing equipment. They had, you know, the best espresso machines and brewing equipment. They had beautiful cafes that people could sit in or post on Instagram. But what they didn't have control over was the cup, the thing that actually went from the barista's hands, to your mouth. So that part of it was really the quintessential experience, right? You can go to a coffee shop for all these things, but what about the coffee? So we started this process that I've kind of outlined before. We met with the baristas, we saw how they roast the beans, we we came up with ideas, iterated with the group, we 3D printed so that we could test the pieces. We took them to the baristas to really test them out. We went through a very long iterative process to get to a cup that really had all the qualities that they were looking for. Had a great kind of ergonomic feel in your hand. When you put it to your lips, it had a really nice mouth feel. It kept the coffee kind of warm, but the cup wasn't too hot. And really created that experience of having a barista really be able to use a cup technically, which there is a lot of technical aspects to it, you wouldn't believe. But then to really pass that off to the customer and have them engage in that experience in a more meaningful way. We then sort of went through that same process again with tea and with glass for a drink that is called a cortado. So that process of iterating, of research with users, having them try it and test it is definitely part of that process. And about the same time, the Hollywood Bowl came to us, and they have a 60 acres in Griffith, it's not Griffith Park, but in the Cahuenga Pass there, and they had a kind of a treasured picnic legacy. Even before the bowl was there, the area was called Daisy Dell, and it was a popular picnicking area. And they said, we have, our whole venue is built on a hill. How can we help people to eat on a hill? How can they eat and not have everything kind of falling down the hill? And the notion of coming up with a system that could march up the hill, could provide a spot where people could lay out something that was flat, was kind of foreign. When we first got there and we observed what was going on, people were taking blankets and putting them on any surface that was somewhat flat. It could be dirt, it could be asphalt, it didn't matter, and they were everywhere. And then, 17,000 people are trying to find their seats, and so the notion of mediating between these two groups in a kind of meaningful way, and then making sure that the experience that people were having when they came to picnic was actually one that was worth having. So this system is spread out through the entire site. We used wood, the sort of kind of standard park bench kind of piece, but we added these elements, this kind of pop of color so that you could find it in a crowd, and that it kind of sort of branded the notion of picnic across the site, so that and sort of celebrated the idea that was such an important value to them to begin with, that people come and enjoy their time before the show. And at Grand Park, the idea was to try to figure out what was kind of a culturally appropriate way to engage people on this grand lawn. And so we looked at the idea of a lawn chair. And the notion of that is something that can sit on grass, that is lightweight and is movable. We really took to heart and created, again, another system of furniture that really worked for users, was that you could take any one of the different types of furniture that was on the site. You could move it, you could put it in a way that you wanted. I love this image of these people with their feet up. And that it works at the scale of the people and how they're interacting with the park, but it kind of also works at the scale of the park and becomes an object that sits within that, and ultimately became sort of an icon for Grand Park. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but someone, an architect recently told me a story about his daughter and her dyslexia. And she had a sort of a severe form of dyslexia and just moved to a new school that was really addressing those needs. And the teacher at a back-to-school night thing set up some sort of real physical examples that they wanted the parents to go through these exercises to really understand what their kids were going through. And so it was the first time that he had ever experienced through this process what his daughter was experiencing, and it kind of blew his mind. Like, he intellectually knew that what the issues were, but he had never really seen it through her eyes, and it was completely eye-opening. And the story kind of stuck with me, and I was digging around and I found this book by British graphic designer Sam Barclay that's called I Wonder What It's Like to Be Dyslexic. And basically his notion was that he wanted to bring something that was beautiful and designed to an experience to show people what it really felt like to be dyslexic. So there's like kind of a very concrete way to make someone feel empathetic for someone who has this severe issue. So I love that design was deployed in this way to make people more empathetic. So a little bit more of a kind of activist thought. I believe that design is women's work, and that we are good, that we come to things with kind of a comprehensive and overall understanding, that we are used to seeing other people's points of view, and that we know, sorry, I'm back a slide, sorry. We know what it's like to have people not understand our point of view. And we often, I've found, speak for others that are either not at the table or in the room. Ooh. This whole thing is confusing. Okay, so I want to talk about like a real kind of example that happened to me very recently. I was working on a large kind of retail-oriented mixed-use project with a developer, and I'm sitting in a room, and all of their people are there, and they're all men. And we're talking about how to actually get people from one level to another level. And they were like, yeah, we just need one elevator. We don't have that many handicapped people here. It's not a big deal. And it's really like, have you looked at the people that are using the space? Have you not thought about, someone pushing a stroller? Or someone who can't just walk up the stairs as a normal course. They're not disabled, but dealing with that many stairs is a problem. And they hadn't really understood it in that way. Their primary concern was cost and feasibility and space for those things to take up. So it's sort of like, well, what kind of experience do you want to create here? So I kind of came away from it thinking, like, why do they not understand the other? Like, their point of view is really all that was brought to the table, and they couldn't really understand that their point of view. I've got a connection request here. Sorry. I think it's fine. Okay, so then I had also recently read an op-ed piece about the sort of notion of male-centered design, about an office, about a building where someone had put an open metal grating between the first floor and the second floor. And this was in a design school here in Los Angeles, so it made it even more a little bit crazy. So I found this image of a bridge in China, and it clearly illustrates the issue, right? If you're walking in a skirt, you don't want to be in that space. So I was thinking, okay, listen, if you're at the Grand Canyon and you want to do that, that glass overlook thing, it's crazy, but go ahead and do that. If you want to go to the top of a skyscraper and have a glass floor looking down, okay, that's fine. But if you want to make someone comfortable that's wearing a skirt, then maybe that's not the right approach to take. So then I was super happy to hear in many of my trips to the bathrooms at the Hollywood Bowl, which we did a number of years ago, and people saying, this must have been designed by a woman. Because it was clear that they understood what it feels like to wait in a very long line. What it feels like to walk into a really dark, kind of dirty, stinky, little bit unsafe space, that we gutted all of the restrooms and we prioritized movement and flow. We made them bright and colorful and clean and added a little bit of glamour to the whole experience. That we considered the entire experience, and that it's actually now, the notion that you've got an intermission, you got to get there and back quickly is enhanced by what we had done there. So I'm optimistic. Even though empathy wasn't something that was part of my education as an architect in school many years ago, I do believe that I've learned a lot through the process of the projects that we've worked on. Something that I work on every day. There's a long way to go there. But I do think that the good news is I see in my daughter in school that empathy is a value that's really important. This notion of collaboration and understanding other people is really important in her learning, and I think provides kind of a deeper understanding through that process. And while empathy is sort of a trendy word and it's a popular kind of concept, I do believe that it's being incorporated into more and more of our sort of real world issues and design problems. And so with this awareness of it, we're not going back.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I would like to now invite up Adaeze Cadet, Vice President at HKS.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Adaeze Cadet, HKS. So here we go. Designing with empathy and what it means at HKS. So a little bit about me. I'm from Sacramento, California. I'm a twin sister, which is pretty freaking awesome. Legos are my BFF. I was going to say were, but I still have them at my place, so they currently are my BFF and my happy place. The grind, I went to Philadelphia University. I transferred to Prairie View A&M University, which is a historically black college right outside of Houston, Texas, where I got my BS and master's degree. I started working at our headquarters in Dallas, transferred to San Francisco, and now transferred to LA. And then the alphabet soup, I got licensed, and I am lead AP. Currently at HKS, I am a vice president in the hospitality sector. And one of the big projects that we're completing right now is the Edition Hotel that's on Sunset in Doheny. It's doing a soft opening. Roberts Lane Hotel, which you'll see here in a little bit. And we also have some projects on Santa Monica Boulevard. And I'm also the sustainability champion and EDI champion within the LA office. So design and empathy Design and empathy creates extraordinary spaces. So what is empathy? Empathy is, gosh, it's kind of hard to see on this. Okay, anyway, we'll make it work. I'll try to be close to it. Okay, here we go. We're just going to do this. This is going to happen. Okay. Because I can't, the angle that I'm in, I can't really see what's going on. Okay, so what is empathy? The true definition of empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And so what does that really mean for us at HKS? We look at it through the lens of the philosophy of responsible design, identifying the stakeholders, defining the process, and understanding the nature of place. Responsible design is a philosophy of the quality of our thinking. It's deliberate, it's integrative, and innovative. It defines the mindsets and methods and the way that we approach our projects. The responsible design ecosystem consists of the 5 stakeholders. We have our client and user, our co-creators, which includes the HKS team, the consultants, internal and external, the earth, and the client, I cannot read that from here, sorry, the client and capital, and the community. So the overall process is we have our 5 stakeholders, and we have alignment workshops set up throughout the whole phase of design. So we're getting together, we're coming up with the ideas and setting the goals throughout the process as we carry through the various phases of design. And this is the outliers for our mindset. We are integrating beauty and performance. We have a transparent studio system in which we have critical thinking and dialogue between our teammates. We set up goals that define the guiding principles and the impact, and we consider ourselves thinking partners where we have open discussions throughout the project. The methods that we use are integrative design process, alignment workshop, which you'll see in a little bit, an example of that, and organizing concepts, and then finalizing our main concepts and big ideas. In our alignment workshops, is where we take our 5 stakeholders and keeping those in mind, we bring the co-creators into a singular space. We have everybody in a room, we throw things on the wall, we see what sticks, we outline where we want this project to go and what we want it to be, and everyone has a voice in the room. And it's super important to have the contractor involved if there's one selected, and also having the owner in the room, so all of these ideas are happening together and you get that alignment. And they're very informal. Here's an example. There's throwing up words on the wall, going back and forth, talking through the ideas, coming up with the overall concepts, and defining and distilling that, keeping, again, those 5 stakeholders in mind, showing them, keeping them in mind, and making sure that their goals are carried through to the end of the project. So here's an example of our nature of praise process. And here, in order to ensure our work can have a positive impact on all our stakeholders, we need to develop an understanding of the system at hand. Nature of Place provides research-based design and the understanding, which is the foundation of empathy, of all the stakeholders that are involved. And so here's an example of a project that was done in Austin, Texas, and here are key touchstones that were carried out through this process of research and understanding of the place at hand, not just the site, but the place in which the site inhabits. So one of the topics here, for example, is the neighborhood fabric. And so questions that the team would ask ourselves about how we can actually, not just at the site, but look at the bigger picture. How do people travel to the site? How does the site and the surrounding area, how will the site and the surrounding areas be impacted by this architectural intervention? I'm looking at energy impact as Earth being one of the stakeholders, looking at how we can improve the power, energy consumption for our project, looking at EDI, going through the different recycling and waste streams and how we can have it, in this example, 10% diverted, and looking at how it can actually benefit the environment, and looking at renewable strategies. And so all this is taking place at the beginning of the project before we really get too deep into schematic design, so that we can use this information to guide us into designing a project that is empathetic to all of these different moving parts. Looking at equity, how it affects, how this intervention would affect the community, where the population is heading, looking at the social demographics and the economic demographics. And this is a project that I worked on to kind of, that chose to show how we incorporated empathy into the design. This is Robertson Lane Hotel. It is located in West Hollywood, in the West Hollywood Design District. You can see there, sites highlighted. It's on Robertson Boulevard, almost where it intersects Santa Monica. It's a 200-plus key hotel, and there's a large retail component on the base. So, looking at the challenges for the project, one of the goals was to break down, it's a very large site, and so we wanted to break down the scale of the site and incorporate this lane that cuts through the project to help activate the community and bring more, activate the community and engage the community through the site by bringing in retail down the middle of the site. So you can see here in this diagram, our site's highlighted there in pink, and that red line symbolizes this lane that we're calling Robertson Lane that cuts through the site. And the idea is that it would tie into the adjacent park that is on the left side of or on the right side of our site, and could foster future development and connect down to the Melrose Triangle. Okay. And so another exciting thing about this project is there's an existing building that's already there that is historic. It's called the Factory Building, and it's a prefabricated steel structure that was initially erected for a camera factory, and it actually produced motion pictures and has a lot of significant, the cameras that they produce have big significance in the foundation for the motion picture industry. And it had a second life. In the 70s and 80s, it became a nightclub called Studio One, which has a huge importance in the LGBTQ community within West Hollywood. And we made a huge effort to preserve the building and keep it. So what we're actually going to do, which is pretty crazy, is take the building apart because it's prefabricated. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees and give it more frontage, right? If you look on this side, you can see that the short side is the part that's framing Robertson Lane, or Robertson Boulevard. And so we're actually going to rotate it 90 degrees, which you'll see in the upper right picture, and have it fronting the site. And then we're creating a commemorative space that will celebrate the history of Studio One and the Mitchell Camera Factory. That'll be up on the second floor, and you can learn about the history of the building. And that awning and entrance is actually the old Studio One entrance that will be restored. So here's a diagram of that, taking the whole thing apart and putting it back together, which is pretty crazy. Part of the reason for that is there's below-grade parking, and in order to do all the excavation, we can't leave the building where it is anyway. So we worked a lot with the city. We had numerous community development hearings, and a lot of people came out to speak on the project, and they are very happy that we're able to maintain this building on the site and provide this huge new project for the site. Another concern that people had were the ballroom space. There really isn't a big event space within the community. And so through the process of talking with the community, we learned that it's super important for them to have this. We have a 10,000 square foot ballroom so they can have events and it can bring people more to West Hollywood and incorporating that into the city fabric. Another thing we focused on was energy and how it corresponds with sustainability and the earth. And so what we had was an eco charrette, and that's one of our alignment workshops where we brought in all of the trades to sit down and talk about how we're actually going to incorporate these sustainability strategies into the project. And it was super helpful. That way you can develop synergies and everyone is heard and you can hear kind of what's going on, what the goals are, how we could really push it. And it was really exciting. I think it got us talking about more things and like, wait, well, if I do those 2 things, I can get these 2 points and these 2 points. And so being able to be in a space where everyone's heard and we're talking about sustainability in a meaningful way really pushed the needle forward on this project. So here are some views of how incorporating all this responsible design, the nature of place, really understanding what the community needed for this project was carried through to the design and created, I think, an interesting and dynamic, I'm partial because I designed it, but created an exciting space that's really going to be a way to incorporate and stitch kind of the community together. So here's a view from the pier. You can see the lobby is pushed towards the front. It's all glassy to help activate and engage the facade. It's just like all obscure over here, it's fine. Activate the facade, you can see the entrance to the lane there on the right where you're cutting through and it'll connect down to the future West Hollywood Park that's being extended down this way. Oops, wrong way. This is the Robertson side, so you can really see how much more pronounced the factory building is on the street. If you were to drive by it now, which I'm sure a lot of people already have, you just drive past it, you don't really see it. So this is a great way to celebrate this building. It's another view of the building. And so, yeah, this is the overview shot. You can really see how we're keeping 95% of the factory building and rotating it 90 degrees. And so it really becomes this gateway into the space, and it celebrates and elevates the history of the neighborhood. And then the hotel is beyond. And so that's pretty much it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I would now like to invite up Sarah Barnard, principal of Sarah Barnard Design. We're recording.
Hi, good morning. I'm Sarah Barnard. In my practice as a WELL and LEED accredited interior architectural designer, I specialize in creating environments that support the occupant's mental and physical well-being. An empathetic approach is really the foundation of my process. As a neurodivergent person with sensory processing differences, I know all too well that we live in a world that's designed for neurotypical people. Normative built environments can be extremely uncomfortable, even traumatic for many people. For example, individuals with PTSD, folks on the autistic spectrum, may both have sensitivities to sound, light, textures, odors. People with chronic migraines, people who are chemically sensitive may also have overlapping reactivity to fragrances, sounds, and light. The reality is, most humans will have experiences during their developmental years that will forever impact our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Research indicates that traumatic experiences don't just happen to some people. It happens to most people. In the late 1990s, Kaiser Permanente did a study where they asked 13,000 of their members to report on their adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Of those members, they completed a 10-question survey, and they cataloged how many of these early childhood negative experiences, and then also their current state of health and all the different things they might be facing as adults. So from this pool of respondents, 2/3 of the people surveyed had at least one ACE. 12% of the population had an ACE score of 4 or more. An ACE score of 4 or more doubles the risk of heart disease and cancer, and increases the risk of suicide by 12 times. Understanding that the health impacts of trauma are not a special population issue, but a general population issue, is critical to our ability to design with empathy. No matter our circumstances, it can be challenging to share the details about ourselves that others may perceive as a disability. So while we can't always ask, we can understand that many of us have unaddressed environmental needs. Even neurotypical people without exposure to trauma can still be experiencing cognitive overload in intensely stimulating environments. Activities like commuting, social interactions, processing large amounts of data, being exposed to fragrances and repetitive auditory disturbances can impact our mental and emotional resilience in unseen ways. Because of the magnitude of stressors in public life, humans benefit from restorative home environments in measurable ways. Restoring at home can make us stronger in the workplace and in the world as a whole. When designing commercial office environments for clients like National Geographic Entertainment, the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, Life Rolls On, and most recently the National Immigration Law Center, I consider the intersections and overlap of the community members and develop strategies to accommodate the highest possible needs. Though it is vital to remember that even as we have access to an ever-growing body of research that informs our practice of designing spaces for well-being, it's nearly impossible to soothe all humans with a single design solution. So, meeting our clients where they are and creating a safe, judgment-free dialogue is the first step in designing inclusive, supportive spaces. In my experience, being mindful and empathetic to diverse sensitivities can create opportunities to design spaces that inspire peace. Armed with the understanding that we can't ask anyone to share the details of their pain, nor specifically ask for what they need, designers must consider the most sensitive populations so that more environments can feel safe and empowering to all. How do we do this? We must start thinking about an expansion of universal design principles to include physical, mental, and emotional health. For example, we know that biophilic design can reduce physiological and psychological stress. We know that having a comfortable place to meditate can reduce anxiety, depression, and pain. We know that exposure to natural light can regulate our circadian rhythms and increase serotonin levels. When access to nature isn't readily available, I find that art is an excellent alternative solution. Viewing original works of art can stimulate the brain, providing an imaginative connection to the mind of the artist and a momentary transcendence into another reality. A 2011 study from the University of London found that viewing art produces a similar effect in the brain to falling in love. So flooding us with pleasure-producing dopamine. Just as we consider the positive impacts of nature and art on health and well-being, we place equal importance on the selection of materials and how they can shift the feeling, light levels, and acoustic qualities of the space. Because, and I'm sure many of you can sympathize with our challenge, specifying and sourcing truly non-toxic materials is challenging because those materials are in limited supply. Our studio regularly designs textiles, wallpaper, furniture, light fixtures, really whatever is needed to meet the client's needs, working with local craftspeople to fabricate our products safely and responsibly. While we are always mindful of avoiding materials with VOCs, some non-toxic materials like linseed oil, tung oils, and even citrus-based solvents have known to cause distress to people who are chemically sensitive, people undergoing chemotherapy, and people with COPD. I feel like I forget to press that button for a while. In 20 years of professional practice, I've learned that empathy and mindfulness are critical in creating healing, supporting environments. Contemplating design strategies that can benefit all populations is not a trend. It's an evolution in expanding our quality of life. Together, we're part of a movement to be mindful, empathetic, and collaborative, supporting one another to make all built environments healing, restorative spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been incredibly insightful. I'm going to invite Julie and Sarah and Adaeze to come back and hand them a microphone. And let's have a little Q&A. Yeah. So what I thought I would do is ask if you can talk to me a little bit about sort of why empathy is moving into the forefront in design tenants, and sort of maybe a little bit about what the historical context or the evolution is and why we're seeing more of this now.
Since I'm holding the microphone, I guess I'll go first. I think it's moving more and towards the forefront because there's more just awareness in general now. I think people are starting to understand that there are people that exist with different point of views outside of their own, and it doesn't just mean being nice to your friend, but it's actually transcending into spaces. And I think it's catching on because more and more people are doing it, and people are experiencing these spaces, and they're like, oh my God, this is really nice. Like, I want this to the next project. And so it's kind of become this grassroots thing that in all actuality should have always been there, but it's exciting that there's been this shift within our way of thinking that now it's being pushed more forward into the forefront, and it's evolving, and it's something that even clients are looking for us to incorporate into their projects, or they've been experiencing these spaces and they say, oh, this is great, we want to push this forward.
I was thinking about the sort of historical context of this, and thinking that, we used to have a society that was very focused on the individual and their needs, and then we had this society where everything's kind of mass-produced, and now we're in a time, with Etsy and all these things, where people can really sort of express their individuality, that people can get things that are made for them. My husband gets shirts that are perfectly sized, for him on the internet. So I think that the notion that each one, everyone is an individual, and that we need to be thinking about them and their needs is sort of just very pervasive in the society right now.
Sarah?
Yeah, so I think because we do have an ever-expanding knowledge base, and because our scope of practice is now positively overlapping with so many other practice areas, that we are finding elements, I think, of social justice and environmental justice impacting the way that we think about our process. So for example, when we think about intersectional design, we think about giving adequate attention to age, gender, ethnicity, religion, ability, education, awareness. And so when we contemplate those different facets and the way that many of us have intersecting elements from those categories, being able to create environments that are mindful and respectful of these differences really is getting us to the empathetic place we need to be.
Fantastic. And let me ask now about challenges. Does anyone want to tackle sort of an anecdote or about what's happening with either the client side or the process side, the delivery side, in a difficulty in delivering a strongly empathetic solution?
I think I gave an example.
I feel like the most common difficulty that I've faced on projects is just getting the shift. I feel like the industry is moving there, but actually getting the teammates and certain people to open up and realize like, hey, this is important. Oh yes, I should think of those things. There's still a little bit of switching back to default mode where it's like, no, we've always done it this way. And it's like, okay, we have always done it that way, but why don't we incorporate some empathy and think about something else? So it's like getting people to get that shift and then communicating it to them in a way that they can understand and giving them examples has probably been the most consistent barrier, but I think it is coming down. Again, as people are experiencing spaces, they start to realize the value of it and see that. And with a lot of clients, let's be honest, it comes down to money. And so when they start to see that it's actually like, oh, it's benefiting the project and, oh, I'm getting higher returns, that gives them sometimes that extra push to get over that little hurdle. So
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think one thing we talk about in our studio in terms of challenges is that in our attempt to be inclusive, we're practicing participatory design strategies where we're trying to involve the community members that will inhabit the space in the design process. Some of the things that we found difficult is that the exact community members of which we're trying to engage may be made uncomfortable by the process because this is unfamiliar to them, because they're not perhaps as comfortable with technology or as comfortable with communicating in these types of ways. A situation that's intended to be a positive one could become a stressful one for everyone involved. And so I think that is a challenge that we face as we move into a more inclusive arena.
You have to provide many different ways for people to engage with that process, that where they feel comfortable. And if you just go at it from one point of view, then you're not being empathetic to the issues that you're talking about. That's really good.
And then possibly to close on that, since we are an audience full of architects and designers, anything concrete you can suggest as a recommendation in their own practice? Any sort of words of wisdom? Anyone want to tackle that?
I think that, and maybe it's just because where I am right now, like the notion that if you really want to kind of engage with people, that you kind of need to slow down, you need to be, kind of remove yourself from this kind of frenetic pace, and that, we think that we have to accomplish all of these things over this period of time that we're here, but maybe if we just sort of pull back a little bit and think that we may not have many opportunities, each one of them we really need to engage more fully, is sort of just the perspective that I'm in now. I think Ettore Sosa said something about, like be calm because, life is kind of fleeting instead of this kind of notion that accomplish as much as possible. It's really, be mindful and deliberate and engage every day in that kind of way.
Yeah, that's great. Ooh, as I drop my water, hold on. I would say my words of wisdom. I don't feel like I'm old enough to have wisdom, but then I can.
Are you calling me?
No, I'm just saying. But then I look at my driver's license. I'm like, oh right, yeah, I am old enough. So I would say probably. Kind of just trust yourself as like a general rule. Our guts are very helpful, and if you have an idea, if you're ever like, especially for the younger designers out there, if you feel like you've got a good idea, you shouldn't feel like you have to stifle it for other people to have their moment. Like there's still a way to be empathetic and listen to people, but then get your ideas out there. Because if you're ever in, and this is a big life lesson for me, when you're in a conference room and you're in a meeting, you're there for a reason. And so if you have an idea, you're at the table, so you might as well share it, and bring it to the forefront. And keeping everyone here, obviously empathy is important to you, so you're important people to have at the table to bring that forward and share your voice and share experiences so that it can get carried into the project and carried forward, and we can talk about that push that's happening from like a grassroots level where you're pushing it onto the table and empathy is getting sprinkled here and sprinkled there, and it like grows and becomes this glorious tree and keeps moving forward. So that's my wisdom.
I think in our studio, the thing that we are regularly practicing and trying to improve upon is our mindfulness in our word choice and our ability to speak cautiously and sensitively. So by being cautious of the words that we choose, we try to make sure that the dialogue we're having is welcoming and inclusive. And so some of the ways that I think we do that is a regular hour instead of you. And we invite everyone to consider with us what we will do together as a group as opposed to what they will do or what we will do for them.
Oh, fantastic. In the interest of keeping us on time, I'm going to say thank you very much for everybody who participated and spoke this morning, and everyone who showed up to be a part of this fantastic event. To also give a huge thank you to OM and to PLP for putting this event together. And I hope that there's a genuine sense of all of our curiosity and engagement in this, and that you will seek out people from OM who are wearing the tag, and you probably recognize PLP and obviously our speakers here, and engage them more in conversation. And let's all come back together and do this again. And I know that PLP wants to hand some Vode lighting as a thank you to the speakers. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here this morning. Absolutely fantastic.